During the film festival, we'll be screening and having a discussion on the thought-provoking film Torn at the Jewish Film Festival in April. Our annual Journeys in Judaism lecture series features some of today's most fascinating and influential rabbis, one conservative, one Orthodox, and one Reform in April and May, and during the summer, a 92nd Street Y series. We offer a very special thank you to Sismay Zell-Kelman, whose generosity has made Sage a community reality. Sis is here with her husband Martin this evening. Please join me in thanking her. Thank you to another important sponsor and supporter of SAGE, Federation's Alliance for Jewish Education. Jeff Lasday, Director of the Alliance, and Judy Lobel, Associate Director of the Alliance Fed Ed and Director of Florence Melton of Metro Detroit are also with us, and many of you know them. Thank you. And my biggest thank you is for Adina Pergament, who's standing somewhere in the back, I'm sure. She's the one who pulls all of this together and makes everything happen. Yay, Adina. Thank you. A special thank you to Oakland University Jewish Studies program, which is co-hosting. They are sponsoring the dessert reception, book sale, and signing following this evening's lecture. The director of the program, Mike Pitlick, is here tonight, and he will be introducing our speaker very shortly. Thank you for co-sponsoring. Tonight's program is part of the Center's Distinguished Speaker Series, and we want to thank the very generous but anonymous donor who has made this event possible. Thank you. Without all these people, we wouldn't have all this. Following Rabbi Boteach's talk, there will be a short Q&A, but the rabbi will also be joining us out in the lobby for a dessert reception, book sale, and signing after the lecture. So if your questions don't get answered here, buy a book, and he'll answer your questions. Please be sure to fill out one of our evaluations, which you can find in the lobby, and once you fill it out, just find someone with one of these tags and hand it in. We would love to hear your opinions and ideas. As a small incentive to fill out an evaluation, we will be raffling off 2 pairs of complimentary tickets to any film at this year's Jewish Film Festival. So please fill out and turn in those evaluations. And now it's my pleasure to call upon Mike Pitlick, who will introduce Rabbi Boteach.
Thank you, Sue. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Pitlick, and I'm the director of the Oakland University's Judaic Studies program, where we are thrilled to be able to co-sponsor this event this evening. I want to let you know that Oakland University offers a minor in Judaic Studies that can complement any academic major or vocation. We also feature a Jewish student organization co-sponsored by Hillel of Metro Detroit. I also lead Oakland students for a study abroad trip in Israel, which features an archaeological program and educational tours of Israel. Please think Oakland when you or your family considers universities. It's now my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Shmuley Boteach. Rabbi Boteach is one of America's most sought-after television and radio guests, having appeared on shows ranging from Oprah, The Today Show, The View, Dr. Phil, Good Morning America, and regular appearances on CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC. Rabbi Shmuley was labeled a cultural phenomenon and the most famous rabbi in America by Newsweek magazine, and is regularly listed as one of the 10 most influential rabbis in the United States. Rabbi Shmuley publishes 3 weekly columns, and is one of the principal contributors to the homepage of the Huffington Post, is a weekly columnist in the Jerusalem Post, and makes regular contributions to the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and many other leading publications. He is Also, of course, the best-selling author of many books, including Kosher Sex, Kosher Adultery, Kosher Sutra, the Michael Jackson tapes, Kosher Jesus. Rabbi Shmuley lives with his wife, Debbie, and their 9 children in Englewood, New Jersey. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Shmuley Botea.
That's what I was waiting for. Can't you all recognize a short man with a broken ego when you see one? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Whenever they say the title Kosher Adultery, you always hear 2 responses: those who giggle and those who don't. I'm always suspicious of those who don't. What are you guys up to? But no, we're not talking about kosher adultery tonight. I think I spoke about that the last time I was in the JCC in Detroit, which was about a millennia ago, not having been invited back since. So we'll make it a much more kosher topic this evening. I want to begin with a story that seems eminently relevant in light of today's news. I just addressed your adult education group. It's called SAGE? Sorry? Okay. Thank you very much. Just goes to show you how much I still have to learn. Okay. And I talked about the news this morning. I have a friend who's a journalist in Jerusalem who started calling me in the middle of the night repeatedly until I woke up. Thought there was an emergency, and he said, "Shmuley, the Pope has resigned," which gave me my opening. So there is a story about Pope Benedict, who I had the great pleasure of meeting a number of years ago. I had an audience with the Pope in the Vatican. But there's a story about Pope Benedict which you may not be aware of, amidst the many accolades and some of the criticism that he's facing today, amidst this monumental news. I don't know if you're aware of the fact that this Pope has a driving fetish. He loves to drive. And a number of years ago, he arrived in Kennedy Airport for a papal visit to the United States, and the mayor of New York is there to greet him, and officials from the State Department, and he alights from the aircraft, kisses the ground, as is his custom, and then there was a beautiful stretch white limo to take him, and the Pope knocks on the window of the driver, and he says, "You go to the back." So the driver goes to the back, and then now the Pope can finally indulge his driving fetish. And he gets into the driver's seat, and now he's racing around the Long Island Expressway at 100 miles an hour. Well, a few minutes later, a state trooper sees him, sounds the siren, pulls him over to the side, and this cop has decided he's going to throw the book at this guy. "How dare you drive 100 miles an hour on my highway?" So he walks over to the Pope's window and he knocks on the glass and he says, "Sir, may I see your driver's license and registration?" Now, the Pope keeps his driver's license inside his cassock, and he pulls it out and it says Head of State, Vatican City, Rome, Italy. The state trooper looks at this, he turns white, and he says, "I will be right back." He races back to his patrol car, takes the walkie-talkie and says, "Give me the supervisor of all New York State Police." So they patch him through and he says, "Sir, we have a diplomatic incident here. There was a man driving 100 miles an hour. By right, he ought to be arrested. But this guy is big." And the chief of police says, "Who is it?" He says, "He's huge." He says, who is it? He's gargantuan. I said, is it a senator? Is it a member of the cabinet? Is it the president? He said, much bigger than any of that. This man is a human colossus. And the chief of police is getting impatient. He says, tell me who it is. And the state trooper says, look, sir, I'm not exactly sure who it is, but whoever it is, he's got the Pope as a driver. It's a true story. And that's all I really came to share with you this evening. God bless you. I love Detroit. And having said nothing offensive, I look forward to seeing you next week. This book, Fed Up Man of Faith, Challenging God in the Face of Tragedy and Suffering, available at all fine bookstores everywhere, is my 29th book. Not that you should be impressed with that, because many of my books have sold 29 copies. And that's after my mother bought 28 for her friends. But it's a book that I've worked on and off for about 13 years. Because it deals with a question that tugs at the very heart of the human experience. It's a subject that we cannot continue to ignore. Less so is it a subject to which we can offer pat responses. We dare not trivialize this subject by offering religious platitudes in response. My friends, of all the great challenges to faith, and let us recall that the Jewish community up until a few generations ago was nearly all observant. Men had beards, perhaps not as sexy as mine. Men had payas. Women wore shaitels. Mikvah was common to every Jewish home. Jewish homes were kosher. And now it's been reversed. 80% of American Jewry are not involved in communal life. Of the 20% that are involved, about 8% consider themselves very observant. The other 12%, different varying aspects of observance. There has been much that has happened to erode the faithfulness or the observance of the Jewish community. Secularization, the modern world. Some might point to science and evolution and some of the intellectual challenges to faith. But there is nothing greater. There is nothing that has shaken the very foundation of belief, like something called the Holocaust. How do we, in the year 2013, just 2 generations after the Holocaust, with so many survivors, thank God, still alive, how could we possibly believe in a benevolent, loving, omniscient, omnipotent creator when 1.5 million Jewish children were incinerated in the crematory of Auschwitz? How could we continue to repose faith in a divine creator when so many of the famous names, geographical locations of the Jewish faith, Jerusalem, Beersheba, Tzfat, Tveria, have been replaced forever, or at least are accompanied now forever, with names like Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka, Auschwitz, Birkenau, Dachau, Majdanek, Gross Rosen, where our brothers and our sisters, where our children and our nephews and our nieces were turned into lampshades and bars of soap and ultimately giant piles of ash. There is no challenge to our Jewish continuity, like our inability to answer the simple question of how is it that a loving God can allow such atrocities? Did anyone hear an interview that I did here on Friday afternoon, Detroit Jewish Radio, with my friend Rabbi Herschel Finman? Thank you all for listening. How many people here have watched my television show Shalom Aleichem on TLC? No wonder I was canceled. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. But can I tell you something? When it comes to the Nielsen ratings, 2 hands still equals 1 viewer. But I appreciate the passion. I truly do. On that show, I heard the classic response on the part of many of my Orthodox Jewish brethren, and I consider myself, and I am, passionately Orthodox, but nevertheless, that God doesn't allow anything bad to transpire, and everything is somehow good. Ein ra yored milamala. No evil can descend from the heavens. That although we can't see it, since we are merely mortal, since we cannot lift the curtain that separates the revealed from the hidden worlds, although we cannot see it, we have to believe that somehow this was for the good. The Holocaust was for the good? How could we possibly believe this was for the good? Well, the state of Israel came about. Was that the only means by which the Jewish state could be reborn? 6 million dead Jews? And who among us has the right to say it was even worth that price? My friends, there are 3 traditional responses to the question of where is God when the righteous suffer. And I first want to demonstrate briefly their utter inadequacy before I try and offer something new. The first response is what you've always heard. It is the most common, and in my opinion, is the most offensive. Why does God allow the innocent to suffer? Because they are not truly innocent. Suffering is the result of sin, of human sin. You get what you deserve. People may appear to be righteous, but you don't know what they're doing behind the scenes. Take the 6 million Jews of the Holocaust. Ostensibly, they appear to be victims, but don't you know that they had abandoned God well before the war? Are you not familiar with the fact that European Jewry had assimilated and acculturated? Beginning with Moses Mendelssohn, who was a very passionately observant Jew, but all of whose children converted to Christianity. By one estimate, before we even make it to the Weimar Republic after the First World War, by one estimate, 80% of all German Jews between the 1750s and the 1920s converted to Christianity and were lost forever to Judaism. They're not innocent. These are heretics, apostates. And even in Germany, the Jews wanted to be more German than the Germans themselves. They had forgotten God. Why? Reform Judaism, which started in Germany in 1824, even removed any mention of the Sechazena Einenu B'Shuvcha L'Tzion B'Rachamim. They removed any reference to a return to Zion. They forgot about Israel. Germany was their homeland, so God punished them for their perfidy. Let me ask you an honest question. Who here has heard some version of that explanation as to why the Holocaust happened? I'm going to take it that you believe in that explanation, but you've heard it. My kids were taught this in yeshiva day school. I paid tuition for them to study this. I had to sell a kidney, actually. I've got 9 kids, thank God, and only 1 spare kidney. Somehow the math doesn't work. But it's not just in the Jewish community. Christianity is largely predicated on this premise. The very essence of Christianity is that every human being is born into sin, original sin. Before you are born guilty. And the only thing that can save you from sin and the punishment of sin and eternal damnation, because through doing nothing at all, just by living your life, even if you're charitable, even if you're faithful in marriage, even if you're a loving parent who reads their kids bedtime stories and has family dinners every single night, you are going to the eternal barbecue of hell, something from which you cannot escape. This is classical Christianity. Unless you oppose faith in Jesus, because there's nothing that you can do to escape sin. So this is the most pervasive idea in religion, that sin leads to suffering. That what appears to be someone innocent is not exactly innocent. They're not righteous. I remember a friend of mine that I grew up with, a woman, had a son who got very sick, a baby, and then he recovered. We all prayed for him. And I was calling her up. I was living in England. I was calling her up, once a month, how's your child? And she said to me, can I speak to you as a rabbi? I said, of course. She said, I know why this happens to other people, but I don't know why it happened to me. Me and my husband are very good people. We're charitable. We're hospitable. Our kids are in Jewish schools. We love God. We're religious Jews. There's another person I know in the community, she said, who feigns all of that, but he's actually a closet homosexual who runs around with men when his wife is not aware of it, and his child has leukemia. And that makes sense. But I don't know why it's not happening to me. And she didn't even realize, as she told me this incredible story, how self-indicting it was. That no doubt there were 5 other people talking about her, giving all the reasons that she's being punished. So let me eviscerate this theory factually and not emotionally. The theory is that 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust because they became irreligious. According to the Satmar Rebbe, Rabbi Teitelbaum, who was a great scholar, massive global following, he said that the Jews of the Holocaust were punished because they had become Zionists. And Zionism is a godless nationalist ideology that is divorced from Judaism. Let me just explain how this theory is bunkum. Do you know what percentage of German Jews survived the Holocaust? Anyone know? 85% of German Jewry survived the Holocaust. They knew who Hitler was, and they had a number of years to get out. Hitler comes to power on the 31st of January, 1933, in a torchlit parade on Unter den Linden. By 1934, we have the Nuremberg race laws. By 1937, we have Kristallnacht. They knew who Hitler was. No one wanted to take them in, but they did everything they could to get out. And 85% survived. Do you know who Hitler primarily incinerated in the Holocaust? The Jews of Poland, who had no clue that he was about to invade, having done a concordat with Stalin to bifurcate Poland and invade on the 1st of September 1939. It was the Hasidim with long pants, who never changed their name, who didn't want to be more German than the Germans, who did not marry out at a 50% intermarriage rate. It was 50,000 Hasidim who were bombed to death in the first month of the war during the Blitzkrieg of Warsaw. 3 million Polish Jews, 1 million Ger Hasidim died in the Holocaust, 1 million. 100,000 Chabad Hasidim, the group that I'm a part of. The theory is ridiculous. Essentially, it says that the Jews who assimilated all survived, and the Jews who were religious all died. Stupid, dumb theory. But more importantly, let's say it were true. Would any of you be prepared to worship a God who gasses children because their parents drive on the Sabbath, would he be worthy of worship? Could you worship him and pray to him and love him? If there were a judge here in Michigan who sentences adulterers to being gassed in a chamber, would he be seen as righteous or as a monster? And to think that this theory that is so often propagated by religious Jews is done to defend God when it is nothing but an indictment of God is truly tragic. I was speaking in a synagogue. You can't make this stuff up. I was speaking in a synagogue in where I live, near where I live, about my book, just before it came out. It was a Saturday afternoon. And I said that a God who could kill 1.5 million children because their parents, not even them, were not religious, could not be a God worthy of worship. The rabbi was very upset. He said he didn't want to embarrass me, but he said I would not be invited to a synagogue anymore because he said I was a heretic. I said, could I at least talk about kosher sex? He was not very amenable to that idea. And then he said something that I will never forget. He got up in front of his community and he said, the name of a great sage. He said, this great sage said that the Chmielnitsky massacres of 1648 and 1649 took place because the Jews talk during synagogue. Now, Chmielnitsky and the Cossacks killed 240,000 Jews by disemboweling them for the most part. There were no gas chambers. There were no machine guns. He had to kill every single person with a sword. And that was the Holocaust before the Holocaust. That was the worst slaughter of Jews in world history. And I'm just confused why anyone religious would think that this is some sort of defense of God to say this stuff. Which leads us to the second explanation. The first explanation is, why did the Holocaust happen? Why do Israeli soldiers die? Because of sin. Another great rabbi in Israel gave a famous speech, what was much quoted. He said the reason why Israeli soldiers die in firefights or the reason Israelis die in bus bombings is because they eat basar lavan. They eat pork. I had an experience with this one day. When I was 16 years old, I was a yeshiva student in Jerusalem, and as per Chabad, we went out every Friday afternoon before the Sabbath. We would give out candles to the women to say a blessing on the candles, and we would put on tefillin with the men. And I was on Rehov Ben Yehuda, smack in the middle of tourist Jerusalem. And for those of you who know Ben Yehuda, it's on a slope. So I was at the top of the streets. I could see everyone coming up to me, make sure I got every single person to put on tefillin, give out candles. No one was going to escape me, not me. I see a soldier walking up toward me, and in his right hand, he's eating a pita. He has a pita in his right hand. So I walk over to him and I say, Slicha chayal einachta tefillin hayom. Excuse me, soldier, have you put on tefillin today? He looked at me and he said to me, Ani kan ochez ve'ochel basar lavan v'ata mevakesh mimeni laniach tefillin. I am eating bacon, pork, in this pita bread, and you're asking me to put on tefillin. In my right hand, I am holding pork. So I looked at him and I said to him, that's great, because we put on tefillin on the left hand. and I quickly pulled up his sleeve and I put the tefillin on and I said the Shema with him, because one mitzvah is never contradicted by another. But a famous rabbi in Israel said the reason why Israeli soldiers die is because they allow pork into Israel. Which leads us to the second explanation. Why does God allow the righteous to suffer? This is almost as famous, almost as pervasive, almost as widespread. And the answer is simple. The first answer was, why does God allow the righteous to suffer? Answer, they're not righteous. They're really sinful. The second answer is, they don't really suffer. What you think is suffering is only a result of your own ignorance. You don't know the real story. You don't know God's plan. Rabos machshavos blevish. People think that they understand everything, but va'atzas Hashem yisakum. But God's supreme knowledge is always paramount. This second explanation is illustrated by virtue of a very famous story that I heard when I was in yeshiva, probably from the age of 12. The founder of the Hasidic movement was Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov. Every year on Simchas Torah, the happiest, most joyous day of the Jewish calendar, barren women would come to him for blessings to conceive. And every year, a woman came along with all these other women, and he would bless them all except her. She came the next year, refused to bless her. The third year, skipped over her again. On the fourth year, she lunged at his feet, held on to his shoes, and said, "I won't let go until you bless me." So he looked at her and he said, "Very well. In the coming year, you will be suckling a child." And true to his word, a year later, she had a beautiful baby boy. And he was the apple of her eye, the delight of her life. And she nursed him, and she cuddled him, and she dressed him, and she fed him. Until, at the age of 2, he contracted pneumonia, and he quickly expired. She came back grief-stricken to the Baal Shem Tov, holding the tiny corpse of her baby. And she placed the corpse down on his desk, and she said, "I demand from you a miracle like that related in the prophets about Elijah. Breathe life into the dead child you gave me." Baal Shem Tov said, "I cannot do that." She said, "Again, I will not leave. The child will decompose before your eyes, and I will not have left." Baal Shem Tov said, "I can see how you are grief-stricken. So this once, just this once, I will reveal to you the true story of your child's soul." And he said, "Do you remember about 50 years ago, Chmielnitsky, the Ukrainian, came with his Cossack bandits, and they wreaked havoc throughout the Polish and Russian countryside, and they slaughtered every Jewish village they met. And there was a Cossack traveling to Chmielnitsky who went to a Jewish village, killed everyone in the town, and then he sees a crying baby, and this Cossack happened to be childless. No one looked. The baby was a few days old, picks him up, adopts him. And for 2 years, this child follows his father wherever he goes, marauding, witnessing pillage and rape and mass murder. At the end of 2 years, the Russian Tsar and the Polish king joined forces to defeat Chmielnitsky in order to restore peace to the countryside. When Chmielnitsky's Cossacks were utterly eviscerated, they come across a baby boy who was still alive, and he's circumcised. Clearly, he's a Jewish boy, and they gave him up for adoption to the Jewish community. The baby was adopted at 2 by a Jewish father and mother, and he was raised to lead a very righteous life, had a family of his own, died at 120 or whatever the age was. And when his soul came before the heavenly tribunal, they said, "We don't know what to do with you. By right, you should go to heaven because you were a righteous man. But the turbulence, the corruption of your soul in those first 2 years is such that you can't go to heaven." And they adjudicated and decided that the soul would come back down to earth to live in peace and holiness for 2 years in order that it be redeemed and enter into heaven. The Baal Shem Tov said, "This was your son." Now, this is one of the most famous stories told of the Baal Shem Tov. And it demonstrates that what appears to be suffering, the worst suffering, the death of a child, is in reality an act of redemption. And when I was told this, when I was 12, I thought it was compelling and convincing. There's so much that we don't understand. But you know, as I got older, I developed a sweet tooth. I would eat all the junk food I could, and I had cavities everywhere. And I'd go to the dentist, and he would pull out a needle this big. And I would say to him, "What the heck are you going to do with that? What is it, like a torture chamber?" He said, "Simple. I'm going to take this needle, I'm going to shove it into your gum, I'm going to put the tooth to sleep, and I'm going to drill. I'm going to drill out the cavity." So I submitted to this torture because I had no choice. But let me just tell you, a few years ago, I had to go still for a cavity. I still have not cured myself of my sweet tooth, even though my monopack is pure muscle. I would demonstrate just how muscular it is, but I don't want to emasculate any of the men in the audience. I'm not here to make enemies. And the dentist just a few years ago, pulls out a needle this big. I said, what the heck is that? He said, I'm going to take the needle, I'm going to put it in your gum, I'm going to numb the tooth. I said, wait a second. I had that when I was 6 years old. They have put men on the moon since then. They have something called the internet. You have not found a painless means by which to numb a tooth in all of that time? You mean everything has advanced except dentistry? I mean, you can't just write some computer code and it disappears? And that's my response to that beautiful story about the Baal Shem Tov. Are you seriously telling me that an all-powerful God cannot cleanse a soul without a mother saying Kaddish for the rest of her life? You mean God, who's all-powerful, cannot bring about good ends through good means? You mean it takes a Holocaust for the state of Israel to be born? You're all-powerful. The answer explains precisely nothing. Absolutely nothing. In fact, I consider the second response to be deeply offensive. We've all heard this. It's for the best. President Obama said it in Newtown. Those 20 children murdered in cold blood by this sociopath, Adam Lanza, the President of the United States, who was attempting to bring comfort to the American people in general, to the parents in particular. And I respect that. I respect the intention. But he fell prey to the same kind of theological justifications. He famously said, God has called those children home. God has called those. I thought their home was in Newtown, Connecticut. You want to tell me that these kids have a home somewhere by the heavenly altar? Their home is being tucked into bed by their parents. Their home is being served spaghetti by their moms who threaten them to eat it or else. A child's home is in their parents' home. It's not in God's home. I consider the second explanation that there's always something better up there, that heaven is better than earth, and this person was too good for this world. I consider it deeply offensive because it's predicated on the idea, somehow, arguably the most noxious, dangerous idea to ever have been offered. It's predicated on the idea that suffering is somehow redemptive, that suffering is somehow good, that if this 2-year-old baby dies, then this mother who's weeping with a Baal Shem Tov has to understand that really there's something good about this. In fact, I have to tell you, is that like a local rabbinic board that is calling in just to make sure that, just tell me the truth, am I safe? Is one of you about to assault the podium and I got a duck or... I have to tell you, the principal difference between Judaism and Christianity is not a belief in Jesus. The principal difference between Judaism and Christianity is that Christianity believes that suffering is good. And Judaism believes that suffering has to be eradicated from the earth. The essence of Christianity is without Jesus suffering and dying on the cross, you are all screwed. You are all going to hell. There's no way out. The suffering of Jesus brings redemption. And ever since then, we've had this belief that if 20 kids die, somehow it can bring the country together. It can help us change gun laws. No, I reject it categorically. There is nothing good that came from those 20 kids dying. Nothing. Zero. How dare we trivialize their deaths? How dare we trivialize their deaths by suggesting that it somehow led to something better? That's why we don't wage enough of a war against suffering and murder. Because we always find some excuse for it. We always find something good about it. My Christian friends who debate me on Christianity, I wrote Kosher Jesus, I spoke about that before. They say to me, but Jesus wanted to die on the cross. He wanted to suffer for the sake of mankind. I said, really? There are 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Mark is the earliest of the Gospels. What does Jesus say on the cross? My God, why hast thou forsaken me. Does that sound like someone who wants to suffer? What does he say in Matthew? The second oldest of the Gospels, the exact same thing. It's quoted from Psalm 22. Keli, Keli lama zavtani, although in the New Testament, interestingly, the translation is, or the Hebrew is, Keli, Keli lama zabachtani. Why have you slaughtered me? It's only when you get to Luke, written well after the death of Christ, that Jesus now says, it is done. The redemption has come about. I'm sorry, in Luke, Jesus says, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they have done. And finally, when we get to the book of John, which offers this deep theology of Jesus dying and human sacrifice, etc., we get to, it is done. But originally, Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me? He doesn't want to die. Where did this belief come from that somehow suffering is redemptive? I can't stand hearing about, I went through suffering, I'm now wiser, I know it's important, my character's been refined. No, sir. Any benefits that accrued to you through this terrible pain and agony that you went through has accrued despite the fact that you suffered and not because of it. Those qualities were in you always. And you somehow persevered and allowed them to triumph amidst the bitterness and corruption of suffering. You know what suffering really does? It makes us angry and bitter and cynical. It breaks our spirit. It makes us jealous of those who don't suffer. Did you see the statistic that came out last week, this major study that was done in Germany, like among 1 million people, that spending an hour a day on Facebook leads to considerable depression? Anyone see that? Unless you go to my Facebook page. I heard it leads to considerable inspiration. Going on Facebook leads to depression because you start seeing how happy everyone else is, how beautiful his girlfriend is, the vacation he's taking. In the meantime, you're having a staycation. In this economy, you couldn't afford to go anywhere. And you're talking to someone, I'd much rather be at home. It's so great to have a staycation. Big deal that my friend is at St. Bart's. He might be eaten by a shark. Look at all the jellyfish around him. I got no jellyfish here in Detroit. You can get heat stroke down in St. Bart's. I'm not going to get it here in Michigan. We talk ourselves into the fact that, I'm not saying being in Detroit is suffering. I'm just kidding. Suffering makes us bitter and broken. For all those people who speak about how ennobling suffering is, this belief that suffering is redemptive, it's so easy to refute this. It's so easy. If you really believe that suffering is somehow good, educational, therapeutic, cleansing, if you really believe it leads to the ennobling of character, then you would intentionally inflict suffering on your children. There's no one you love more in the world than your kids. And if it's such a great educational tool, you would cause them to suffer because it's such a phenomenal educator. But instead, we parents do everything to prevent our children from suffering. We may give our kids challenges. We might teach them the value of $1 in hard work, but that's not suffering. That's called endeavor, engagement, not being lazy. But we never inflict suffering on them. We do everything we can to avoid it because we know it's horrible. So that's the end of the second answer, which leaves us with this. There was a man named Tzvi Kulitz. He's an Israeli playwright. He's no longer alive. In the wake of the Holocaust, he wrote the famous story of Yossele Rackover. Yossele Rackover was a Gera Chassid who had 11 children. And 10 of his kids, along with his wife, had already died, either by being murdered by the Einsatzgruppen or by typhoid. He had one child left, and he retreated to the Warsaw Ghetto, and he was now part of the Warsaw Ghetto resistance. And it was like the 13th day of the revolt, and now the end was coming. The Germans were bringing in heavy artillery to just level the ghetto. His son was 8 years old, and he was being used as a scout. And the heads of the resistance told his son to raise his head to see if the artillery was coming closer. He raises his head, and he fell behind with a bullet between his eyes. He was taken out by a German sniper. It was at that moment, with the last of his children now lost, that Yossel Rockover famously wrote his last will and testament to God before death. And he put it into a bottle that was found after the war. And this is what he said. He said, Lord God, Master of the heavens and the earth, I have lived my whole life in consecration of your will. You said that I should be fruitful and multiply, and I had 11 children, and they are now all lost. And you robbed me of hope by robbing me of my children, and you robbed me of my future. You said that a man should not be alone. And I married young to a woman that I loved and who loved me. And now you have robbed me of love through her death as well. You have robbed me of my dignity. I am now living like a caged animal, defecating into a bucket, trying to avoid having a number stamped onto my arm. Such is the dignity left to my struggling humanity. But there is one thing that you will never take from me. Lord, I have lived my life as a believing Jew. I have lived my life affirming faith in you every day, 3 times a day, saying the Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And the only thing I have left is my faith. And you have done everything to rob me of it. You have done everything in your power to convince me that you do not exist. You have done everything to make me believe that you are cruel and distant and non-existent. But I am stronger than you, O Lord. You can never rob me of my faith. You can take everything from me but that. I will die as I have lived, a believing Jew. I am stronger than you, O Lord. So I close my eyes with the words of that solid affirmation. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. Here in Auschwitz, here in Birkenau, here in Majdanek, here in Belzec, the Lord is one. My friends, the Jewish response to suffering is to be prepared to challenge God and to demand the end of suffering and to tell God that we demand more equal status with him in order to affirm all that he taught us is precious, that we affirm life even when God doesn't seem to affirm life. Yisrael, he who wrestles with God, he who challenges God, he who refuses to accept that people are punished for sin, he who refuses to accept that suffering is somehow for the best, he who affirms that life is precious and it dare never be taken. How did Abraham react when God told him that the residents of Sodom and Gomorrah, who were roim v'chatoim l'Hashem ma'od, they were evil and wicked, they were an affront to God, and they would all be destroyed with fire and brimstone raining down from the heavens. Abraham says, he raises his fist to God, and he offers the ultimate chutzpah that a human being can speak this way to God. He says, Hashofet kol ha'oretz lo ya'aseh mishpat. You, who are the judge of the entire earth, shall not himself practice justice? How dare you tell me you're going to slaughter an entire city? How dare you tell me you're going to slaughter an entire people? I don't care how sinful they are. I don't care how you think it's for the best. You told me that I must choose life, and I affirm life. What an amazing thing for the first Jew to say to God. Would any of us have the courage to say that today? When God comes to Moses right after the redemption from Egypt, 10 plagues, God making the Pharaoh and the Egyptians suffer for their persecution of the Israelite slaves. And now, just a few weeks later, the Jews are like an adulterous wife, as the Talmud sees it. They built for themselves a golden calf. They've forsaken God. They've embraced the ways of the Egyptians. They're now worshiping money. They have forgotten God. They're worshiping money. They're like the accusations against Germany's Jews. They have forgotten God. They're now just interested in careers and being professors and doctors, and they've changed their names. And God says to Moses, Lech red, get off Mount Sinai, Moses. For you, for the people that you have brought out of Egypt, they have become corrupt. Soru mahir min haderech, they've left the righteous path. Ve'ata hanichali, now let me be, O Moses. I will consume them. You will not only be the leader or the prophet of the nation, you will be the father of a new nation. You will be like George Washington, like Garibaldi, like Romulus and Remus. And then, my friends, we read this every single Jewish fast day. In the most beautiful, articulate, and haunting defense of human life ever offered, the Torah suddenly says, Vayachal Moshe es Pnei Hashem Elokav. And Moses began to entreat the Lord his God. Vayachal. From the word chola, he became sick. The Talmud says he was coughing up blood when he heard people were going to die. And he says to God, Lama Hashem, why, O Lord? Yechera abcha b'amecha, how could you be so angry? You once loved them. You took them out of Egypt. And then he does something that is positively mind-boggling. He says to God, now if you will forgive them, then our relationship can continue. But if not, you must erase my name from the Torah that you have written. My association with the Torah is now complete. It is over. I want my name stricken from the Torah. If the Torah is a book that condemns people to death, then take me out. If Judaism is a religion that finds fault in others, then take me out. If Judaism is a religion of judgment that looks at a Reform congregation and sees only people who are traitors to their faith, if it looks at a conservative congregation and says, look at all the changes that they've made, if it cannot find good in people, then you must take my name out. Because you taught me, O Lord, these are not my values, they are your values, that life is precious and that people are good and that you have to be patient with them and you have to find the good. And amazingly, God gives in. God changes his plan. In fact, the Talmud says he was prodding Moses. Let me be, Moses. The Talmud says, let me be. He hasn't even opened his mouth. God was prodding him. Moses, your job is never to reckon with death, never to explain it, never to embrace suffering. Your job is to protest. Your job is to protest. We have rabbis today that have forgotten they're supposed to be defense attorneys and they become prosecutors. We have priests who've forgotten that their job is to be comforters, not people who bring indictments. God Almighty, look at what religion has come to in the United States. Every day we hear some other religious leader getting up and condemning the gays and condemning the abortionists and condemning this group, and condemning that group. And even if you have a theological problem with certain groups, do you not see the spark of the divine in these people? How did religious people become prosecuting attorneys? You know, Dr. Mehmet Oz, who's world famous, probably the most famous doctor in the world, he and I were on Oprah and Friends together. And he's a loving friend. And I ran for Congress as a Republican to try to change some of the values in the party and get America to talk about new values. Why are we talking about gay marriage when we should be talking about divorce? 50% divorce rate. Why aren't we talking about making marital counseling tax deductible so that couples can get the help that they need? I'm a child of divorce. Why are we talking about contraception and abortion when we should be talking about a national year of service so that high school kids stop being so self-absorbed and narcissistic and updating their Facebook pages with their breakfast every morning? Why don't we teach them what John F. Kennedy said, that they have to give something back to their countries? And the day after the election, when the Republican Party was hit very hard, Dr. Oz, who's a Muslim and a great friend of the Jewish people, said to me, Shmuley, we're using religion as a malignant weapon. A malignant weapon. I'll never forget those words. When God sent Moses to tell Pharaoh for the first time, let my people go. This is at the very end of the first section of Shemos of Exodus. It's an amazing encounter. Moses comes to Pharaoh and says, you got to let the people go. God sent me. Pharaoh says, who's God? Why? I got 10,000 gods. I control the gods. They don't control me. And then he gets angry. He says to Moses, you're just lazy. You Jews are lazy. Tichbar olam avodah. I'm going to make it harder for you guys. Up until now, you made bricks with straw. The straw is used in the furnace, and the clay dries, and you have bricks. Now I'm removing the straw. You'll have to leave the clay to bake in the sun. It'll take much longer, but the quota of bricks is not going to change. You guys are going to suffer. You know what Moses does? He goes back to God, and he says the following. Lama hare osa la'am hazeh. Why, God, have you behaved wickedly with this innocent people? Lama zeh shalachtani. Why'd you even save me? Why'd you waste my time? Because since you sent me, you didn't save anybody. Does that sound like the way we challenge God today? You know what religion has done to us today? It's made us a bunch of weaklings. We have vindicated, tragically, the words of people like Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, who said that religion just knocks the stuffing out of you and makes you surrender. It makes you submissive, it makes you passive. God is always right and we're always guilty. And the net result is religion has lost its fire. It's lost its capacity to truly inspire and lift people up. I remember when that rabbi, whose name I don't want to say because I'm not looking to put anyone down, but a world-famous rabbi in Israel, the greatest rabbi in Israel at the time, said that Israeli soldiers died because the kibbutznikim eat rabbits. I'm sure many of you remember this. When he said that, my Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, spoke that Shabbos. And it's a scene I will never forget. The Rebbe was in his 80s. He had 10,000 people in front of him. No microphone, trying to speak to all of them on Shabbos. And he said, this week, a rabbi said that brave Israeli soldiers who defend the Jewish nation so that they can live in peace die out of punishment for eating rabbit and non-kosher meat. And then the Rebbe screamed, when he said this, Hot emetzer gechalisht? Did none of you faint? Did none of you protest? You heard a man indict the IDF, to whom every yeshiva student has to be indebted. I was in yeshiva for 2 years in Israel. I was protected by soldiers. My daughter is currently serving in the IDF. And she's home right now after 1 year of being a chayelet bodada in Israel, after 1 year of being a lone soldier in Israel. The IDF actually buys you a ticket to visit your parents. And my daughter is there right now, which is why I want to go home tomorrow to see her, because she has a few more days and then she goes back. When someone indicted the IDF and said these soldiers deserve to die, we all just took it on the chin. You know the famous story of Elie Wiesel that he tells? The trial, that after the Holocaust, 9 rabbis went back to Europe and they held a trial. They indicted God for the abandonment of European Jewry, and they deliberated for weeks. There was a prosecuting attorney, there was a defense attorney. They brought arguments why God was guilty, they brought arguments why God was innocent. And Nimnu v'gamru, in the end, the verdict was that God was guilty as charged. God was guilty of abandoning the Jews of Europe to their fate, to the SS monsters, to Hitler, to the Gestapo, to Reinhard Heydrich, to Heinrich Himmler, to Adolf Eichmann. And you know what those 9 rabbis did after they found God guilty of the abandonment of European Jewry? They went outside, found a 10th man for the minyan, and they davened mincha. Because the same God who had commanded them to pray 3 times a day commanded them to stand up for life at all times, to challenge God. That's what the word Israel means. To be a Muslim is to submit. Islam means literally submission. That's its literal translation. To be a Christian, as Soren Kierkegaard famously said, is to make the leap of faith. It's to suspend your rational faculties at times and accept that God is always just, but not to be a Jew. To be a Jew is to be a Yisrael. What is the literal translation of Yisrael? He who argues with God, he who wrestles with God, he who spars with God. I know a man who built a synagogue, not with his own money. He's not a rich man. He's a professional. But he raised the money and he built a synagogue in a city where there wasn't one, an Orthodox Jew. And so many people started praying because of him. And one day, his 21-year-old son was at university and he collapsed. He had a brain aneurysm and he died instantly. And I was with him during the Shiva. He stopped coming to synagogue. And I went to see him a few weeks later. I said, "How are you?" He said, "I can't pray." He said, "I sometimes go for the sake of my younger children because they want to go. But even then, I don't open a prayer book. I can't pray to God." He said, "Shmuley, I've lived a righteous life. How could God do this? He's either cruel or he doesn't exist." I said to him, "Why are you angry?" He said, "I'm angry because so many rabbis sat with me and told me that my son is in a better place. I'm angry because they told me that God has a reason and we don't understand it and we have to submit. And I'm angry at God." And I said to him, "If you're angry at God, then why did you stop going to synagogue? Now is the time to go and talk to him. Express your anger. Open that prayer book and say what Moses said. If you do this, then take my name out of your Torah. This has to stop. Say what Abraham said. Hashofet kol haaretz lo ya'aseh mishpat. You are the judge of the entire earth. You won't practice justice. This is the time to go to synagogue. This is not the time to stop communicating. It's the beginning of communication. Since when did they tell us that being a religious Jew meant that you are not allowed to experience true emotion? That you have to suppress all that you feel? Do any of you want to have that kind of marriage based on fraudulence, based on suppressing everything that you feel? And then we wonder why religion is dead. We wonder this sterile, dead Judaism, which is parroted before us. We wonder why it makes no impact on our soul. We wonder why we feel so cold to it when we're being encouraged to have a relationship of fraudulence. Being an observant religious Jew means sometimes feeling love and benevolence toward God. And it sometimes means feeling disappointment and anger toward God, as long as you always have that relationship with God. But what we don't do is sever the relationship. Do you know what the Jewish response to suffering is? It's the words of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Zechariah. It's to pray for a time when death will be consumed and ended from the earth, when disease will be no more, when hunger and starvation will disappear. The atheist doctor who believes in absolutely nothing, but who works day and night to cure AIDS and to cure cancer, is infinitely more in tune with the authentic Jewish response to suffering than the rabbi who tells parents who lost a child that this is for the best. Prolonging life, ending suffering, giving tzedakah, clothing the naked, feeding the hungry, comforting the bereaved, that is the Jewish response to suffering. We dare never excuse it. And that's why you have never read a book and never will read a book that gives real comfort to the problem of suffering, because you're not meant to be comforted. If you're comforted, then you won't do anything about it. You will make peace with it, and you'll believe it's for the best. You know, when I told you that about 13 years ago I started working on this book. It was a series of 8 lectures that I gave in London when I was living in England. And every week a woman came and she stood by the doorpost. She wouldn't even sit down. And I gave this 8-part lecture series in someone's house. At the end of the lecture series, and she never said who she was. She would always leave just before the lecture ended. Final lecture ends and she sticks around. She waits for everybody to go and she comes over to me and says to me, "I wanted to say this to you privately because I didn't want to offend you. I didn't want to embarrass you." She said, "You know, a friend of mine told me you were giving this lecture series, so I came. And I came expecting to find solace and comfort." I said, "You see, my 27-year-old daughter, who was already the mother of 3 children, died last year, and I'm raising her children. And I look at them every day, these orphans, and I wonder how God could allow it. And it's tearing my soul apart, and I came here to understand, and you've given me no comfort and no understanding." And I said to her, I'm sorry to let you down. I can't imagine what you're going through. But madam, if 8 lectures could take away the pain, how valuable was your daughter in the first place? You mean I could give a stupid, dumb speech and suddenly your daughter's death is atoned for? It doesn't hurt anymore? There are certain things, the pain only goes away when we affirm life. I said, you're never going to know why she died because she didn't die for any good reason. You have every right to challenge God, but the only way you're going to deal with that pain is if you help others who are going through something similar. It's if you invest yourself in a charitable project based on her memory that prolongs other people's lives. The answer to death is life, not justifying death. It's not embracing death. And that's why I still miss my Rebbe. The Rebbe died 18 years ago. I was his emissary at Oxford at the time. And I remember to his dying day, he coined this phrase that became central to the Chabad movement. It was just 2 words in Hebrew. Ad Mosai. How much longer? How much longer, O God, will you allow innocent people to suffer? We don't want books. We don't want speeches. The world is flawed. It needs to get better. But in God's seeming absence, we will do what he commanded us to do. I spend most of my life among non-observant Jews who are not that observant, but who are fiercely Jewish. I spend most of my life lecturing to audiences, not in Orthodox shuls, but in JCCs, federations, Jews who love their Judaism, but they're not necessarily most Orthodox. And I'm just amazed at the dedication to this Jewish value of life. Feeding the hungry. I wasn't surprised to hear from Mr. Litt, the executive director, who I met tonight for the first time, I believe. Very fine man and his wife at dinner. I wasn't surprised to hear that right here on the JCC campus, there are a bunch of apartments for the Jewish elderly. In many communities, they wouldn't even have the elderly near the young people. They would want to make sure the young people came to the JCC. And we don't want people at the gym having to look at people in their 80s because then the young people, it's not cool anymore. They're not going to come. But that's not a Jewish idea. Our elderly are of infinite value. They're not less valuable because they're older. What an amazing thing. What an amazing people we are. What an amazing community we are. We are quite simply the most charitable and compassionate people in the world, and we never deserved a Holocaust. And our soldiers never deserved to die. This past Friday night, God forbid, about 3 months ago, me and my wife became grandparents, thank God. So, thank you very much. But I'm still super sexy and very masculine. Just in case. So because my daughter came home from the army, our eldest daughter, who lives in Los Angeles, came with her husband with the baby. The baby's 2 months old, thank God. So we made a party. Well, it was hard having a party this past Friday night because we had 2 feet of snow that was dumped on us. But some people still made it on their sleds. And so I had a friend who's a national TV host came for Shabbos dinner. She somehow made it. And she was very interested to speak to my daughter about life in the IDF. And she said to my daughter, Chana, I know that you're such a good person. I've known you for so many years. I find it hard to square the little girl I knew coming to your house for Shabbos dinners all these years with someone who's serving in the IDF. She said, I'm Jewish. I'm a little bit embarrassed about the Israeli army. It's, persecutes people and all these, what it does to the Palestinians. So my daughter is even shorter than I am, if that can be believed. My daughter says to her, do you realize I had to go through basic training? We had to run around with tens and tens of kilos on our backs and learn to use different weapons. And because although girls do not serve in combat in the IDF by and large, they train the men. And my daughter says to her, I didn't even know this. And I thought I knew a lot about the IDF and defending Israel. She said, in basic training, when they gave us our Galil assault rifles, even though you can put it on automatic, you are never allowed to put it on automatic, even if you're in a firefight. So my friend, the TV host, says to my daughter, because you don't want to kill innocent civilians, right? Because if you're just spraying bullets, you'll kill, collateral damage. She said, no, that's not the reason. I said, that's another reason, but that's not the reason. They told us the reason is that if you're going to fire on someone, you're going to pull the trigger individually every single time. You're going to think about who you're shooting at, that there's a human being in front of you, even if they're trying to take your life. So you may have to defend yourself by taking theirs. But you don't just spray bullets. You're pulling the trigger every single time to think about every single bullet you're firing. Which military does things like that? So we deserve so much better. And God owes it to us. And we have a right to make demands of God, because he makes demands of us too. We're good people, and the Jewish people deserve life. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I pray that one day the Jewish messianic prophecies will indeed be realized, of an earth where the wolf lies down with the lamb, a metaphor for the non-Jewish nations finally embracing the light that the Jewish people have to offer. And a world where umala aretz deas Hashem k'mayim lo yom mechasim, a time when the earth shall be filled of the knowledge of God as the waters cover the ocean floor. A world where we're slightly less materialistic, slightly less joyous of things we buy, and so much more joyous of just the human company we have, where we appreciate each other, where our marriages are what define our happiness, where our children at our table is that which gives us meaning, where we don't live insatiably from one material object to another, but where we feel filled all the time by the light of human love. Thank you very much. We're taking questions? Didn't I go on too long already? Okay. If you don't have a question, if you simply want to state how this lecture has changed your life, I would find that acceptable. Go ahead.
Take some of your ideas to today. Israel can stand and wait for Iran, or Israel can do something. It can action on its own. Is your view that it's up to Israel to make a decision, or should we pray to God that Iran will do the right thing?
Now you're asking me to put my congressional hat on.
I think it's not a political thing. It's not to illustrate the point. You can talk about whatever you want.
I am a great believer in something I call muscular morality. I don't believe that being a moral person means being stepped on or being killed. Iran is the single greatest threat to world peace. I am a Jewish American. I love America with every fiber of my being. This is the greatest country in the world, and in my strong opinion, there is nothing that serves Israel's interests that doesn't serve America's interests. Iran is a bigger threat to the United States than it is to Israel. If you think that the mullahs in Iran wouldn't be more joyous in striking the U.S. than they would Israel, if they strike the U.S., they strike the great Satan. If they strike Israel, they only strike the great Satan's proxy, the little Satan. So President Obama, I'm a Republican, but God bless President Obama. He's made it clear that the policy of the United States is not containment, but prevention. The United States, he has said repeatedly, wants to stop Iran from getting a bomb. But they're getting closer every day. Should Israel take action if the United States categorically refuses to? That's a no-brainer, of course. Even if they cannot prevent Iran fully from developing a weapon, they need to show that when we say never again, we mean never again. So people are going to say, well, that's really going to piss off the Iranians. They're going to be really, really upset. It seems to me that they're probably there already. Like, it's an interesting thing when people say to me that if Israel strikes, then Ahmadinejad's really going to get angry. That's like the argument. Benedict announced that he's resigning today. I'm very sad about that. Benedict is, I'm not going to go talk about it now. I talked about it in our last speech. Pope Benedict is a phenomenal friend of the world Jewish community. and he has a deep affection for Jews. But he does want to beatify and canonize Pope Pius XII. Now, Pius XII never condemned Hitler, never condemned the extermination of European Jewry while he was Pope. The argument that the church often uses, and I'm an admirer of the Catholic Church, but we have our differences. We Jews have our differences with Catholics, and Pius XII is one of the big modern differences. The Catholic argument is, if he had spoken out, it would have been much worse. If he had spoken out about the Holocaust, things would have been much worse. And this is, you can go on YouTube tonight, you can see my debate with my dear friend Gary Krupp, who's a double papal knight. He was knighted by John Paul, he was knighted by Benedict, probably closest Jew in the world to the Vatican, very special man, very good friend of mine. And we did a public debate about Pius. And he said this, and you'll see it on YouTube tonight if you Google it. I said to him, Gary, worse than the Holocaust? I mean, worse, it could have gotten really bad. Had Pius spoken out, Hitler would have said, now, no holds barred anymore. And it's that kind of argument. Now, we can, of course, it's nervous laughter we all have because it's just too horrible to contemplate what Hitler did to us, to our brothers and our sisters. And the same thing is true with Iran. To say that if Israel strikes, they're really going to get angry. Ahmadinejad is an international menace. He's an international criminal. He is far worse for the Iranians than he is for the Israelis or the Americans. He slaughtered his own people in the streets of Tehran in the summer of 2009. He is a killer. He is a monster. And I get really offended when people speak about him as a clown, as a joke. Do not make light of this man. They said the same thing about Hitler. These people, we must take them seriously. And I got to tell you, Ahmadinejad is one of the best people. I just spoke in our last talk about how bad we Jews are at PR. And for those of you who want to read my column in today's Jerusalem Post, it's all about this. Why isn't there a Jewish Martin Luther King? Why isn't there a Jewish Billy Graham? We've never really developed these global spokespeople who become champions of our nation. But Ahmadinejad is one of the best people I've ever seen on television. He runs circles around top American interviewers like Brian Williams, like Katie Couric. They all think they're going to have him on and they're going to upstage him. So Katie Couric says to him, but you denied the Holocaust. And he goes, me? Deny the Holocaust? I never said there wasn't a Holocaust. I said that we all have to follow fact rather than emotion. I said, let's bring the historians to examine how many died. Let's see what the truth is. He's brilliant. He disarms almost everyone that interviews him. Now, the idea is, once you make the Holocaust a question, open to historical debate, that's the whole purpose of these revisionists. But we have to take him very seriously. And he is seriously good at PR. Colombia invites Ahmadinejad to speak. Lee Bollinger, the president. And so Bollinger gets up in front of all these students. Could you imagine, in our day and age, a modern Hitler is invited to a university with 5,000 Jewish students in Ivy League? It's disgusting. It's just disgusting. But Lee Bollinger wants to show, we're going to let him speak, but we're going to disparage him before. So Bollinger goes up and says, you're a petty tyrant, you treat gays so badly, etc. And then Ahmadinejad rightly gets up and says, wow, in my faith in Islam, we're commanded to treat guests with respect. I wouldn't introduce someone. He's right. You either don't have him because he's a monster, or if you have him, you don't disparage him and then show that you're the one who's not moral. But he's a you got to take very seriously. And Iran is a very serious threat. And isn't it amazing, now that I'm not running for office, I could actually answer your question directly? No. God says clearly, God blesses you in all that you do. And when we read in the Torah 3 weeks ago, the splitting of the Red Sea, Parshas Beshalach, Moses starts praying. The Egyptians are catching up to them. They're all going to be killed. He starts to pray to God, and God says to him, well, what are you praying for? This is not a time for prayer. This is a time for decisive action. Yes. Yes, please. People like me?
I asked my dad.
You mean people like me?
Well, not like you.
I honestly don't feel that way.
I ended up joining Rabbi Wein's congregation, and I'm a member of the Birmingham Temple. I took my dad before I joined. Do you know anything about humanistic Judaism? Have you ever heard of it? Yes or no?
Which Judaism? I'm sorry?
Humanistic Judaism. Have you ever heard
Of course I have. Of course I have. Of course I have. The Ethical Cultural Center in New York, where we do a lot of our events, is.
I asked my dad if he would come and listen to Sherman White, and is it okay if I join? He said, Les, it's not for me, but it is for you. And I remember one thing that makes me know I'm as good a Jew as anybody, because what Rabbi Hillel said, when asked, what is the essence of Judaism, and you know it better than I,
Yes.
what did he say?
That which you hate, don't do unto others.
Do unto others as you would others do unto you.
Yeah, can I just point something out? In that story,
And the rest is all common.
yeah, but then he said,
Response.
but you know the rest of what he said. We all quote that beautiful story that Hill has asked, teach me the Torah standing on one foot, and he says, "Man desni lach lecha b'chalei savad." That which you hate. Wait, just one moment. Just one moment. He says that which you hate, don't do unto others. Zeu kol haTorah kula, as you said, this is the entire Torah. V'idach pirusha, the rest is commentary. But we forget the last two words he said. Now go and study. To answer your question, you are absolutely not just as Jewish as me. You're as Jewish as Moses and Abraham. There's the answer. Judaism is not a state of observance. It's a state of being. We're a family. Now, we may have some real differences. I'm an Orthodox Jew. I'm sure there were Reform Jews here, maybe Reconstructionist Jews, maybe conservative Jews. We have some differences. The main differences pertain to identity issues. Like, what does it take to become a Jew? And those are serious differences that I wish our community addressed more to create more unified standards of things like conversion or marriage, because that's where we get separated. But those are the real issues. The rest, we're all Jews. We're absolutely all Jews. No one denies that. As far as humanistic Judaism, I hope that every Judaism is humanistic. I hope. But what I would advise you, if you don't mind, is I've done a number of debates that are also available on YouTube with some of the world's leading atheists, some of whom were Jewish. Christopher Hitchens was halachically Jewish. He and I had 4 debates. One of them has 1 million views on YouTube, 92nd Street Y, 2008. We talked about all these issues. I believe in an intellectually rigorous Judaism that addresses whether or not we need a supernal God or whether we can just rely on ethics alone. My whole argument of the necessity of God and against something which is a strictly humanistic Judaism is, let's say you say to me you don't believe in murder. Okay, well, who's giving the law? You? If it's you, then it's subject to your interpretation. Germany believed that people should not murder. It's just that it was their law, so they could determine to whom it applied. You couldn't go and kill someone in Germany, but if you killed a Jew, it was different because he wasn't really human. But when God says in the 10 Commandments, do not murder, that's everybody. You cannot murder anybody because everyone is God's child. Before we attack Judaism as some sort of a xenophobic faith, let us recall this is the religion that says in the first chapter of its Bible that every human being is created in God's image. Could you imagine a religion saying this 3,300 years ago? It boggles the mind that the black man and the white man and the Native American and the gay man and the lesbian and whatever your choice, you are equally a child of God. That's that's an unbelievable statement. That's Judaism. So of course it has humanity at its center. But to rip God away from it has its consequences. I believe in a world that has holiness because God is a part of it. I believe that whether or not a man is faithful to his wife is not just a question of whether he's caught, but whether there's a sanctity and a sacredness to that relationship. I sat with a husband just last night who's having an affair and his wife doesn't know, and whatever you don't know can't hurt you. The dumbest saying in the entire English language, by the way. You don't know that a truck's about to hit you, but as long as you don't know. But I believe that God can confer a certain sacredness on these relationships. I believe in the innocence of a child, and there's something holy about the innocence of a child. Let me conclude, I guess, so we're done. Let me conclude this little story. We'll do a tiny little celebrity dropping in this. I was asked, last night a friend of mine gave a lecture to an Orthodox Jewish group that helps autistic children. My friend Cory Booker, who many of you know, the mayor of Newark. So I went to hear him. Cory and I are, he was the president of my student organization at Oxford. So we were talking about autistic kids on the phone. And I said, you just reminded me of an incredible story about Michael Jackson. I was Michael Jackson's rabbi between 1999 and 2001. I tried to help him get his life together. Failed. But I miss him till today, and there was something very special about him. But when he was doing his album Invincible, so a friend of mine who has a Down syndrome brother in his 30s with the mental acumen of a 6-year-old, he asked me, he said that my brother does the moonwalk, and Michael's his hero. Could he come to meet me? So I told Michael said, it's so many distractions, we're recording. I said, Michael, it'll be 5 minutes. Okay, 5 minutes. So we bring the guy to Michael's hotel suite in the Four Seasons Hotel on 57th Street, Manhattan. And he does the moonwalk, and he does all of Michael's gestures, and Michael's laughing and having a very good time. And it's like an hour later, and Michael still hasn't, he's still there. And finally, I told Michael's got to get back to doing his album. But Michael keeps him there an hour and a half now. When he left, I said, you said you were busy. Why did you keep him? I'll never forget this. He said to me, my whole life I've only ever wanted to be innocent. I wanted innocence. He started in nightclubs when he was 5. And he described to me what it was like. 6, 7 years old. The Jackson 5 were performing in these places where women were taking off their clothes. He was seeing stuff as a boy. He said, all I've ever wanted is to recapture my innocence. He said, I'm jealous of that man because he will always be innocent. So there's a sacredness to children. There's a holiness to children. There are things that humanistic Judaism, in my opinion, doesn't completely capture, which doesn't in any way change the fact that every Jew is as Jewish as Moses and every Jew is as Jewish as Abraham. There is no difference. Thank you all very much for hosting me here in Detroit. And if you want to stay in touch on Twitter, at Rabbi Shmuley, Facebook, Rabbi Shmuley, and if you want to make the world a better place,